In today's captivating chess video, we delve into one of the most potent and crushing openings for white, the Vienna Opening. Get ready to discover the match-winning tricks and traps hidden within this strategic masterpiece. After starting with e4 and black responding with e5, instead of the usual knight f3 move, we will opt for the less popular knight to c3. This move is known as the Vienna Opening. From this point, black typically chooses between two common responses. Now let's focus on the move knight f6. In this case, we will initiate the Vienna Gambit, which begins with the move f4. Although it may be perceived as a risky move, playing pawn to e5 after capturing the knight is a viable option. Notably, the trapped knight is left with no safe squares and is forced to retreat. Care must be taken to address the potential threat of queen h4. To counter this, the next move involves developing a knight, thereby establishing a favorable position. However, I would like to illustrate an intriguing trap that arises from this position. In this particular scenario, the most common and apparent response from black is to play d6, aiming to attack the center and open up the diagonal for the bishop. In response, we choose to play d4, reinforcing the center with an additional defender. Black captures the pawn, but instead of recapturing, we opt to check with the bishop. Black blocks the check with a pawn, and we subsequently retreat the bishop to c4. As black continues capturing pawns, we find ourselves 3 pawns down, with the knight also under attack. Surprisingly, we deliberately ignore this threat and proceed with bishop development. If black becomes tempted and captures the knight, they will fall into a trap. We initiate a bishop sacrifice with a check on f7. If black captures the bishop, they will lose their queen. However, if black refrains from capturing the bishop, can you determine the winning move? If you were considering bishop g5 check, that move would not be effective as the knight can simply interpose itself. Consequently, the best move in this position is queen e2 check. Moving the black king to h6 or blocking with the bishop would lead to an immediate checkmate. Therefore, capturing the bishop seems like the most reasonable response for black. However, even in that case, there is a brilliant move available, knight e5 check. If the black king moves to the e-file, knight c6 wins the queen due to the discovered check. Consequently, the only viable move for black is king to f6. Now, an absolutely stunning move follows, bishop g5 check. If the black king moves away, the queen is lost. Even if black captures the bishop, a beautiful family fork occurs, resulting in the loss of the queen. In fact, with a few more moves, checkmating black should become easily achievable. It is worth noting that you should also be able to achieve an easy checkmate. Now, let's explore another remarkable trap. Sometimes, instead of retreating their knight, your opponent may attempt to outsmart you by playing queen e7, preventing the movement of your pawn. So, what should you do in this situation? The solution is simple: play queen e2 to unpin the pawn. The advantage is that the pawn is protected, so your opponent cannot capture it with the queen. Consequently, they are forced to move back. Once again, it's important to address the potential queen h4 check. By developing your knight, you ensure that it covers that square. What comes next? As you can observe, black's pieces are cramped, and a major problem for them is the e-pawn. The most common responses you'll encounter are d6 and knight c6. Let's examine them individually. If black plays d6, you have an incredibly powerful move available, knight to d5. This move not only threatens a deadly check, but also targets the queen. Therefore, queen e6 is clearly a losing move for black. Consequently, in most cases, you will see either queen d7 or d8 as a response. Regardless of their choice, you have a discovered check lined up, ready to be executed. However, a simpler approach is to directly attack by capturing the pawn. In response, when the rook is in danger, black takes with the queen. Ultimately, you will have a discovered check, leading to the removal of the queen from the board. By all means, this trick deserves appreciation, so if you found it useful, please give this video a thumbs up by hitting that like button below. Now, let's consider the scenario when black chooses to play knight c6 instead of d6. In this case, you have the opportunity to play d4, which both strengthens the center and targets the pawn. Furthermore, whenever black moves the pawn, you can attack it with the knight as we saw earlier, resulting in a highly advantageous position for white. Now, let's return to the starting position. We have just observed the significant disadvantage for black when they accept the gambit. However, if black declines and defends with either d6 or knight c6, let's first examine the response to knight c6. Although not the best move, after captures, you can attack the knight and force it to retreat. Then, you can threaten the other knight and push it back as well. Focus on developing your pieces, while also being mindful of stopping the queen h4 check. Even if black tries to open up the center, continue with your piece development. Don't be overly concerned about the pawns, instead, aim to activate all your pieces and castle on the king side. Utilize the open f-file to direct your entire army towards the black king. This strategic approach will result in a favorable position for white. Now, let's explore the response to black declining the gambit with d6. The underlying ideas are quite similar. Start by developing your knight to attack the center. If black brings out the other knight, you can pin it with your bishop. Open up the diagonal, eliminate the knight, and exert pressure on the center. Eventually, you can castle and initiate an attack along the f-file. Overall, this leads to a highly advantageous position for white in the long run. However, there is one move that allows black to stay in the game, and that is declining the gambit with d5. This move is not instinctive, and it's unlikely that someone who hasn't studied it would play it. Nonetheless, this move leads to the main line. After you capture the pawn, black can recapture with the knight since it is defended by the pawn. In response, you can play knight f3 to prevent the check, but an even better option is to play queen to f3. This check is still defended, and it is highly probable that your opponent will opt to exchange the knights. From this point, various moves are possible, but the key idea is to develop your bishops, possibly castle on the queen side, and launch attacks with your rooks along the open files. Even if black executes this line flawlessly, the game remains balanced. Now let's shift our focus to the scenario when black plays knight c6 instead of knight f6. The move f4 is not as effective due to the immediate threat of a queen check. Even if you defend with the knight, black can play g5, causing discomfort on the king side. Therefore, playing f4 is not as advantageous as observed in the earlier variation. Instead, I would recommend playing a normal development move like bishop c4. You might wonder why not develop the knight first. The reason is that in many variations, we might want to quickly play d3 or f4 to exchange pawns and exploit the f-file. By keeping the knight undeveloped, we keep our options open for future moves. Thus, bringing out the bishop allows flexibility to play d3 or f4 whenever it suits the position. Now, when black tries to imitate your moves by playing bishop c5, you have an extraordinary move at your disposal, queen to g4, directly targeting the pawn on g7. Typically, black would respond with queen f6, defending the pawn while simultaneously threatening f2. If you consider saving the pawn, it's not the best choice, because there is a far superior move available, knight to d5. Even if black captures the knight, there won't be much they can do after this check. While it's not a checkmate, black simply loses the queen. Essentially, there is no good continuation for black's attack. Furthermore, you are threatening to capture both pawns and potentially both rooks, making it difficult for black to handle the situation. Some players may attempt d6, but you can then take on g7. You don't even need to capture the rook immediately, instead, attack the queen with your knight. If black takes the knight, counterattack with your rook. Black can't simply move away, because that would result in a devastating loss. Go all in, keep giving checks, and it's just a matter of time before delivering a decisive checkmate. Even if Black chooses not to capture the knight in this position, they are still in deep trouble due to the various ongoing attacks. Going back a bit, if Black plays moves like g6 or king f8 to avoid the capture, you can still attack the queen, and surprisingly, the queen has no safe squares to retreat. Black is forced to move the queen to d4, where you can box it in and effectively trap it in the middle of the board. Eventually, you can play c3 and capture the trapped queen. The threat of knight c7 still looms, and at some point, you can maneuver the queen and rook to f7 to launch a strong attack on the Black king. All in all, this position offers a dream scenario for White. In this position, some players might also try knight f6 to target the queen. However, you have a beautiful check available, once again putting Black in a struggle to hold on to the game. Now, let's return to the initial position with bishop c4, bishop c5, and queen g4. In response, Black commonly plays queen f6. However, if Black tries g6, it's important to be cautious of the move d5, which targets both the queen and the bishop. To protect the queen, it's crucial to move it to a safe square, while maintaining pressure on the king side. Following that, you can continue by developing the knight to prevent knight d4. Another intriguing line arises after d3 and d6, where you have the opportunity to trap the Black knight. If Black defends with the king, introducing another attacker can lead to the loss of the knight. Moving forward, let's consider the more prevalent response from Black, which is knight f6. In this variation, playing f4, or any random move, is not advisable since Black can cleverly capture on e4 with the knight. The key point is that after capturing, Black has the move d5, which grants them an advantage. Therefore, before making any further moves in this variation, it's essential to secure the pawn on e4 to prevent the knight e4 idea. Hence, d3 is a favorable choice. Bishop c5 is a common response, and at this point, if desired, you can play f4. If Black captures the pawn, you recapture, and if Black defends it, you increase the pressure in the center. In fact, an intriguing trap exists in this position after knight g4. While Black may intend to fork your queen and rook, you can disregard that threat and counterattack in a similar manner. If Black falls for the fork, the stunning move queen h5 leads to Black's downfall. If Black plays g6, you respond with a check, initiating an attack on the king from all directions. Your queen will become involved, and White will be in a significantly advantageous position. In the event that Black chooses to castle and adopt a cautious approach instead of an immediate fork, you can disrupt the support for the knight. Even in this situation, the same tactic is effective since you threaten from both directions. Black is almost compelled to play h6, allowing you to expose the king, eliminate the rook, and eventually push f6. Numerous mating ideas are available, whether it involves proceeding in a specific direction, or delivering checkmate from the top, or even employing the bishop to conclude the attack. In summary, Black encounters difficulties if they attempt knight g4. Now, let's consider the scenario where Black tries bishop g4. The crucial move to remember here is knight to a4. The objective is to exchange off these pieces. If Black's knight jumps in, you can counter it with c3. Let Black carry out the exchange, and although doubled pawns may result, it's acceptable because you can castle on the queen side and utilize the open file for your rook. Once the dust settles, you will enjoy good central control and a significantly improved position. So, those were the primary variations of the Vienna Gambit. Now, it's time for a puzzle. In the given position, it's White's turn, and you need to find the best move for White. Share your answers in the comments, and let's see how many of you can solve it correctly. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and peace.